This is the cast on Minion Death Ice Meteor Stormweaver. This build boasts incredible boss damage, instantly freezing all base content of the game with a very comfortable one-button playstyle. I have been playing this build since the start of the early access and have been trivializing all content, never finding any difficulty that many others were complaining about, because anything I looked at would either immediately be frozen, if not instantly shattered and one-shot by a barrage of meteors, and very large double shocks from the Stormweaver Ascendancy. This build has already been nerfed by GGG once, and it does require very specific gear to set up, so the chances of this being nerfed again are near zero. So, how does the build function? Build functions around using the Fire Flower Amulet in conjunction with the Necromantic Talisman Keystone to apply the Fire Flower Amulet to our minions instead of us. The amulet itself does nothing, except for the one line that reads take 100 fire damage when you ignite an enemy. The U in this case now applies to our minions, so anytime they ignite an enemy, they take 100 fire damage. We use this with Summon Raging Spirits linked with Infernal Legion and Minion Instability. So, since they are the squishiest minion, they spawn in, they ignite something with Infernal Legion, they take 100 fire damage, and that brings them low enough for minion instability to pop them, and when they pop, well, that gives energy to our cast on minion death triggers, where we have our ice comets, and they start raining down. I hope you're a fan of cold showers because that's all you're going to be seeing on your screen while you're playing this. So for offenses, in the early game we used 3 cast on minion death setups, and later on we switched to 2 cast on minion death setups and 1 Archmage setup, because Archmage is just too powerful for any sort of spellcaster, and since we already stack a lot of mana and mana regen anyway, so Archmage just makes sense. We combine this with Stormweaver's Double Shock to do insane damage to everything, killing anything and everything within a second as long as we have the mana to do so. And all we have to do is hold on Flame Wall to summon our Raging Spirits on top of any enemy to make them ignite it and unalive themselves, and then the comets just start raining down. For defenses, we are running a Mind Over Matter Eldritch Battery setup. I chose to not go CI, because since we are stacking a lot of life to convert into ES anyway, it's nice to have that extra backup EHP, and we have enough room in our suffixes to add in Chaos Res. You can go CI if you want to, it's just my personal preference that I didn't go it. We also have around a 40 to 50% block chance and the best defense of freezing and chilling everything before it even touches us. We stack a massive amount of mana and mana regen, and we combine that with Grim Feast and Mana Remnants both, constantly refilling our ES and mana by killing enemies. This makes us incredibly resilient while doing majority of mapping, especially high density content. This build does suffer in the end game, where physical hits get very high, so stun starts to become an issue, but we can opt in to use a stun charm, and by then you can still do difficulty 0, 1, and 2 bosses with ease. I do not recommend doing difficulty 3 and 4 bossing with this budget setup. For that, I do recommend getting a 6 link and swapping out your shield for a wand for even more damage, because at that point you just want to dodge and do damage. You don't really want to rely on your shield too much. I unfortunately cannot stream on my toaster PC, so any questions that you have, I can answer them live. So feel free to join my Discord and ask me there, or comment on this video and I'll answer them here. I always respond to everything, but if you do have any questions, feel free to look at the FAQ in the build planner on Maxroll, and that should have most of the answers to the questions that you may have. So with that being said, we'll now go in-game, where I will explain the gear, the passive tree, and the gem links. So I'll see you there. Hello everyone. Okay, so you guys saw the intro, you saw the highlights, you saw me explain how the amulet works with necromantic aegis. Now I'm going to go over the gear, skill gems, the passive tree, and the ascendancy, all in that order. So let's begin, and in the end of this video I will cover the build planner in case you guys don't know how to use that. Since we don't have POP, we have to use that instead. So starting with the gear, let's start with the helmet first. So the helmet gives us all of our energy shield. Without the helmet, we have none. So how does that work? That works in conjunction with Eldritch Battery. Eldritch Battery says that we convert all of our energy shield to mana. That only applies to the flat energy shield that we are getting from our gloves, our body armor, our boots, our shield, and our helmet. It does not take into account any percent increased energy shield from our passive tree. It doesn't take into account anything. Okay, so that being said, this helmet gives us life as extra maximum energy shield. So that comes after this conversion. So first, all of our base ES gets converted, then we gain, and then that gained ES gets increased by increased ES modifiers on our passive tree. That is why we have 2300 ES. So 30% of my life is like what, 900 or so energy shield? And then that is raised up by these nodes here, like nodes like this and this, and one more over here, this one. Okay, so that's the helmet. This is the best in slots. There is nothing better than this. I've tried many different ones, but just the massive energy shield buffer that we get from this, plus Grim Feast buffing that up even more, is just great. The damage taken bypass ES doesn't really matter to us much because we have a pool of mana right behind it, but do try to get a low roll of damage taken bypasses and a highest roll possible of maximum life as extra ES. You can corrupt this to get even more life as ES and even less damage taken bypasses ES, but I don't really like that. I prefer getting 2 sockets instead so that I get another soul core in here for chaos res. You can instead put in soul cores for maximum mana instead. Those are way stronger. Getting like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 max mana soul cores is absolutely insane. But those are expensive. They're like 30 to 40 eggs each. These chaos res ones are way cheaper, and having chaos res makes you feel much safer to the insane amount of chaos damage that you have in maps. Body armor, boots, and gloves are exactly the same. They are all supposed to just be life, high ES, high mana, and resistances. So starting with the body armor, we have mana regen in our implicit thanks to the Keth Raiment base. I do recommend getting this one, but if you cannot get this one, it's fine to get the Hexer's robe instead. It will give you more ES, but having the mana regen is just very nice. The suffixes on these, you do not want to get triple res. Triple res, the current economy, is stupid because players are stupid. They see 3 resistance rolls on an item and they just wet their pants. It's insane. The price difference from 2 resistances and 3 is hundreds of exalts sometimes. So get 2 resistances on your gear and 1 attribute or 1 whatever the hell you want. Okay, so speaking of attributes, you do need to get at least 1 big attribute roll on one of your gear pieces. So mine is on my ring. I have a high strength roll. You either need strength or you need int. Ideally, you want int, and I explain why. That is because our maximum strength requirement through our scepter and our shield is 55. Okay? Anything above that is just extra and it's not giving us much. It's just giving us life, and that life is converting a little bit to ES. Right? That's all that strength is giving us. But intelligence is giving us mana. Mana is damage, mana is mana regen, mana is, mana for intelligence for our gem requirements and all of that. So mana is better. That is why if you have a lot of mana on your rings and your items and you need more strength, then you can just change your passive tree to have more strength instead of intelligence. But if you have way too much strength on your gear, then you can't really do that. You'll just be overcapped on strength, and that's bad. Right now, I am way overcapped on intelligence, thanks to having 1, 2 strength rollers on my gear, but this is just barely putting me over the top. If I had anything more than this, if I had 30 strength on my belt, then I'd just have way too much strength and it would just be overcapped for no reason. So yeah, that's the body armor. Same thing with the gloves and boots. Life, mana, res. I did get 1 chaos res roll here because having chaos res above 50 feels very nice. That's around the point where I say you can just stop focusing on chaos res around 50. Having 75 is great. Getting 75 is impossible. So get like 50-ish. Don't get 30 or 40-ish. Try to go for 50-ish. That is the comfortable number, at least for me. If you're comfortable with lower chaos res, just ditch it entirely, dodge the poison. But we all know you're not going to dodge the poison. Boots. These do not have a mana roll or a life roll. What are you doing? Well, one thing to note, and I'll show an example of a different boot over here. So this was my boot during the early courses of the game. I kept these for quite a long time. These have 32 ES and 97 mana, right? So thanks to Eldritch Battery, any ES on our gear is just mana. So we can say that this has a total of 129 mana, right? Add the mana and the ES. 129 mana. These boots have 136 ES and no mana. But since we just said ES is mana, this has 136 mana. So this is just better in terms of mana. That is why the thing to note is anytime you're getting any piece of gear, whether it's boots or gloves, manage the amount of mana carefully. Okay, because maybe if a boot has 100 mana on it, but has no ES on it, it might be worse than a boot that has no mana on it, but has a lot of ES on it. So try to add up those numbers together and get the best boot with the highest amount of mana and ES combined. This does, however, have no life roll on it, so that's bad. Ideally, I would want to remove that hybrid ES and stun threshold prefix and replace that with a very high mana roll or life roll, but getting that with 30% movement speed is very hard. And boots, you can be a bit stingy. You don't need ES, you don't need mana or anything. You really need movement speed and resistances. So if getting move speed plus ES and mana is hard, just skip that, get movement speed and res only. That's only for boots. And why do we need a lot of movement speed, you might ask? Well, even if you feel like, oh, we're not going to be running around that much, I'm going to be bossing or whatever. Well, movement speed makes you roll faster if you did not know this. So this will be rolling with movement speed. This will be rolling without movement speed. So you see how insanely slow that is in comparison? That is why movement speed is very nice to have. Even if you're bossing, you can roll thrice in the amount of time you can roll twice with these boots. So keep that in mind. Next, shield. This is the only thing that I have triple res on, because these are surprisingly cheap even with triple res. It's strange. I just think there's just a lot more of these in the economy. So life, res, block chance. Shields cannot roll mana, so don't worry about that. They can roll flat energy shield. So if you do find a base with ES, get it. Otherwise, prioritize life on this first, because this did have an open prefix, but that prefix changed to physical thorns. It sucks. But yeah, it can roll hybrid armor plus ES. So if you get that, great. Don't get a shield with too high of a strength requirement, you will screw yourself over. Get one with 55, because your scepter is 54. Get with 55, then you won't need to worry about strength too much. I used to have one with a 77 strength requirement, and I was crying. Next up are the rings. So these are the most important part of the build, but this is where we roll our mana regen. This is the only part of the build that can roll mana regen. It can roll on amulets, but we basically don't have an amulet because it's been given to our minion instead. So, rings. You need high life, high mana, and high mana regen. Getting resistances on this is good, but basically impossible because mana regen is two different mods for some insane reason. There's one mana regen mod, and then there's another one, mana regen plus light radius combined. So you basically have one open slot to have resistances on it. And I happen to have rarity on this. And in your prefixes, there's nothing good. There's just life and mana, and maybe if you're lucky, you can get cold damage or lightning damage. But that doesn't really do that much. So yeah, mana regen, life, and mana. Those are your three priorities. Try to get this on a prismatic ring base, because that'll help you cap out your resistances on all your other gear pieces. But yeah. Or you can get an amethyst ring for chaos stress. Same thing with this ring, life, mana, mana regen. I did happen to get lucky and I get strength as my third prefix, third suffix, which is great. As mentioned, you need one big roll of attributes. Got it here. Great. Belt. Exactly the same as your other gear pieces, life, mana, resistances, maybe an attribute roll. The implicit on the belt doesn't matter much, but if you can, get an instant recovery one or a mana recovery rate increased one from Flask. Mana recovery Flask rate. Flask mana recovery rate. My brain is fried. Sorry. So yeah, life, mana, resistances. These are all going to be very, very cheap pieces. Like, they won't cost you much, trust me. Just don't go insane on resistances on any one piece of gear. Spread your resistances out on all your pieces of gear. That will make it much, much cheaper. If you get 30 res here, 30 here, 30 here, 30 here, and 30 here, you'll be capped. I have 10, 20 here, 20 here, 40 here, 30 here. So like I messed it up a bit, but if you want, you can just tone down the res on one piece, get it more on the other piece, and so on and so forth. It is not hard to find these gear pieces. I found all of these relatively very, very cheap. I did not spend a lot on this build at all. So you will be okay. The only expensive piece is the amulet, and the rest is just smooth sailing for the most part. There is one quick note. I am not res capped. I have a bit too much fire res, and I really just did not feel like fixing it. So yeah. Yeah. And instant recovery. Why do we use instant recovery flasks? Well, we use these because our mana is our life, essentially. And we use instant recovery life flasks, so why not mana? This is because if you're in a map and our ES is gone, for example, let's just take this off and pretend we have no ES, then we are taking damage to our mana. Let's say our mana drops to 0. Oh no. Now we are taking damage on our life. It's chunking down. Oh no, we're dying. What do you do in a normal Path of Exile moment when you start to lose life? You start spamming your instant life flask and trying to run away. So same thing here, you spam your life flask and your mana flask. You start hyper spamming both of them while trying to dodge roll away, basically. Right? I have saved my life countless times doing that when I get frozen or stun locked by something and I need to get away. I just start hard spamming both my flasks and spamming dodge roll to get away. That's it. So getting an instant recovery built will allow you to no longer need instant recovery flasks. You can instead use instant increased amount recovered flasks. These will give you way more instant recovery of mana and of life. The life one goes up to 2000, the mana one goes up to like 600. So yeah, very, very strong if you can get an instant recovery built. Those are a bit more expensive, so do be careful with that. So gems. Let's quickly go over these, starting with the top, Malice. This is coming from our Scepter. This gives us critical weakness to enemies in an area around us. This makes it so we no longer need to use Eye of Winter to apply crit weakness. So get this, very important. If you cannot get a Scepter with high enough spirit to be able to do this, that's fine. You can just get a Skeletal Warrior instead, but do not get a Purity of Fire Scepter. Do not get one. That will mess up your fire damage from this. It'll ruin it. It'll brick the build. Don't get it. Speaking of Scepter and Scepter stuff, you need a Scepter with a minimum of 210 spirits in order to allocate all of your different meta gems and your auras and your whatever. Okay, 210. You can get that with a Scepter that has a minimum of 78% increased spirit on the explicit, and you can quality it up to have 210 total spirit in the end. The only good mods on your Scepter are mana and mana regen, and maybe attributes if you can get them, but it's going to be nearly impossible to get them. And I also would not recommend getting them for a reason I'll share in a little bit. So the one mod on this I do not like is minions having increased maximum life. That does make it so they sometimes don't instantly die from this, sometimes, not always. So having no increased life is better, but getting a Scepter with high enough spirit on a Malice base is not the easiest thing, because I wanted 220 spirit instead of 210. So that is even harder. So the moment I saw this, I picked it up. Even though it has increased life, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter too much. So after that, we have Sigil of Power. That is in our weapon swap. It's coming from this staff right here. Sigil of Power basically just gives us way more spell damage and gives us even more spell damage once we are casting inside the circle. And so we just spam this, boom, big circle, and then we start using all of our abilities in this. And yeah. One quick note, if you do not know, we do use a weapon swap in this, and I will go over more details of the weapon swap and the weapon set skill points in the end. Raging Spirits, this is how we are triggering our cast on Minion Death. We spawn these using our Flame Wall. They use Infernal Legion to burn enemies around them. When they burn them, they take 100 fire damage. They have such low life that 100 fire damage is enough to pop them. They pop and are cast on Minion Death procs. So, cast on Minion Death. This is a meta gem. Meta gems are gems that are basically aura gems. They gain energy based on the trigger condition, in this case, Minion Death. Every single time a minion dies, the gem gets a certain amount of power based on the minion's power. So we don't really have exact numbers for minion power of Raging Spirits. It is very hard to do the math. I did do the math. I'm not going to bother you with the math. But if you want to know how to do the math, you basically, maximum energy is 300. So you remove all your energy gain modifiers, and then you cast your Minion Death. You cast your minions, and when they die, you see how much energy do you get. I get 53% total energy. That means I'm getting a little more than 150. And then you divide that by 5 because it's 5 minions dying at the same time. So it's more like you're getting 31-ish or 30 something energy per baby minion dying. So it's weird. Don't think about it too much, right? Because I already did the math, and I can tell you that you need exactly 141 energy gain modifier. Okay, don't think about how much energy you're gaining. Just look at this number. Okay, why do you need 141? I have a bit too much. Let me just take off one of my jewels here. I need to replace this one anyway. Put my helmet back on. Yeah, so now I have 140 to 141% increased energy modifier. So what this does, I'll show you. If I use my flame ball once and these 5 flaming spirits die, like you can see up here, I have 50% energy in my minion death gems. So that means that 2 casts, aka 10 minion deaths, trigger my gems. Why is that important? Well, that means that if I'm running around in the map, I have to do boom, boom, and my comets come down. Every 2 casts, my comets come down. Every 2 casts. Okay? But if I have less than 141% increased energy gained, if I take off another jewel, now I'm at 128. Right? So if I turn these back on, and now I use it twice, and I let the minions die, oh no, nothing came out. That means I need to use my flame wall thrice in a map before my comets come down. That is a huge decrease in DPS. Trust me. I tried to make this high enough that I can get my minions to pop out on the first cast. Like boom, click once, and these die, and my comets come down instantly. That doesn't happen. It is impossible. I would need to basically allocate all these points here, these 3 over here. I need to put in these 2 here. I would need to path over to more jewel sockets for more increased energy. I'd basically need a 300% or like 282% increased energy gained in order to be able to do that, which would mean that from my current point of having 141, I would need another 7 joules, give or take, 5 joules, give or take, in order to get that, which no, it's not needed, it's not necessary. Just keep it at exactly 141. You don't need any more than that. How do you get the energy? Well, I already mentioned, you get it through meta skills, gain increased energy modifiers on your sapphire jewels. This is the only place to get it on gear, or if you don't have enough jewels for some reason, even though they're very cheap, you can get these nodes right here to get any remaining energy that you need. Energize is not needed. It's just too many passive points to go all the way over there for this one node. So yeah, that is enough about cast on Minion Death. The actual gem links inside of this are the following. We have only 5 links. I'm not going to bother with 6 links because they are so insanely expensive. that is just not worth it to even think about. So it's just 5 links: Comet, Spell Echo, Concentrated Effect, and Considered Casting. Now, a quick note about this. This gem is currently bugged because this is not supposed to work with triggers. It's only supposed to work with gems you cast yourself. But currently, it is bugged. So we're using it. But when it stops being bugged, you will replace this with Rising Tempest instead. So, second caster minion death will be Comet, Spell Cascade, Stormfire, and Conduction. So one of these two read shocks from supported skills do not expire on ignited enemies, and Conduction, supported skills have 100% more chance to shock. So this is great because while you're going around mapping and stuff or killing bosses, your shock does expire pretty fast because of us having less shock duration. I'll go over the Ascendancy in a bit, but we do have less shock duration. So, especially on pinnacle bosses, your shock tends to keep on expiring, and it feels pretty crappy when it does expire. So, we don't want it to do that. That is why we use Stormfire. However, if you aren't doing pinnacle boss content, you can remove that and instead put Controlled Destruction in there instead for more damage. But yeah, so third, the most important aura, surprisingly, even though our build is based around cast on minion death, Archmage. Any spellcaster in their right minds will need to use Archmage. It is just way too damn strong. Why is that? Well, if I look at my damage without Archmage, let me show this one. 16,760 average damage per use of Comet. Turn Archmage on. Now we have 60,000 damage instead. So you can see the absolutely insane damage difference from just having Comet on versus having it not on. So very big, very strong. Do not forget that Archmage is just all of our damage. It's just insane, right? So besides that, what else do we have? We have Hypothermia. So this is our main curse setup. It is reducing the cold res of enemies. This is linked with Cold Mastery, Heightened Curse, and Ritualistic Curse. Don't worry, the increased delay from this doesn't matter much because of our skill tree. It gives us reduced delay. So in the end, if I cast this, boom, it goes off in less than a half a second. So it's completely fine there. This is in my weapon swap. It is in weapon swap too. So, and I'll go over weapon swaps in the end. So don't worry. Frostbomb, this is, our way to apply cold exposure. It is pretty fast. You just go around and boom, there's your Frostbomb. It is like the Font of Mana. This basically gives us increased mana while we are near our Frostbomb. So if you put this on, you can see this icon up here shows that we have Font of Mana. If you run away too far, it goes away. It is a 3-meter radius. So you can see that by, it's basically the same as the visual for Frostbomb. So you can see when it starts touching my feet, I can almost get it. So yeah. And then we have Persistence to make it last longer, and Strip Away for increased effect of exposure. Flame Wall, pretty simple. We are using this to get our minions out. If you can get a low level Flame Wall, that's great. It'll overall reduce your mana cost. Same with the Raging Spirits. Get a lowest level one of this as possible. The lowest level you can get is 4. That's just when it drops in the campaign. So yeah. Oh, and the other supports for Raging Spirit are Minion Stability and Feeding Frenzy. These don't matter much, they just make them take more damage and explode faster. And then Flame Wall is linked with mobility so that we can move faster while we're casting this. Arcane Tempo for more cast speed while casting it. And Energy Barrier, this is just good because if you're casting this and you get stunned while casting, which can happen a lot into your 16s, this just helps because it starts giving you back your ES. So pretty helpful. Grim Feast and Mana Remnants. These are the last two auras that we have. Grim Feast gives us Grim Remnants every single time an enemy dies in our presence. And that Remnant, when you pick it up, gives us around 177 ES. It can go up with quality. This makes breaches and any sort of high density content feel like a breeze. You just walk through like this, and everything is dying. Mana Remnants and Grim Remnants are spawning out, giving you ES recovery, mana recovery, all of the recovery. Okay. Mana remnants are the same thing. 25% chance to spawn a remnant on killing a shocked enemy. This does apply even if you kill the enemy with the hit that shocks them, it still gives you a mana remnant. So that's pretty good. So this combined with this makes breaches and any sort of high density content very easy. This also can overcap your mana, but since we're using way too much mana anyway, the overcap never really does anything. That's all. That's it for the skill gems. One quick thing to note, however, for bosses, Grim Remnant and Mana Remnant both do nothing for bosses. Right? If you have reached a pinnacle boss, you want to fight a pinnacle boss, there is an experimental setup that I'm trying out. That is cast on Minion Death, Lightning Conduit. Okay, so this is the setup. It is cast on Minion Death, Lightning Conduit, Elemental Focus, and Inspiration. So this will basically remove the shock and do a big chunk of damage to the boss every single time. I haven't really tested this out yet. I do have 50% shock effect. That means this is a 1000% more damage with hits, with 25% more damage and inspiration to make the spell mana cost less. I have not tested this out. This was a new idea that I just had. So it's there. It will be more damage. It's not that much mana cost because we are using inspiration on this. So yeah, if you want to use it, use it. But I just don't really like doing swaps, so I'm just going to stick with my usual. So that's it for the skill gems. The passive tree. It is a very simple passive tree. There's nothing too crazy about it. We're just going into a bunch of mana regen and any increased mana that we can get. So there's increased ES, increased mana, Eldritch battery, mind over matter. This makes us take damage from mana before life. Our necromantic ages. Quick note about damage recoup. This is a very strong node because we are taking damage to our ES first. That is giving us a buffer of mana recoup afterwards. So when our ES does finally go down, our mana regen is already speeding up a lot thanks to the damage recoup. Besides that, I don't think there's anything much to like really explain. This is mana regen and shock effect, shock magnitude. Like everything else is pretty straightforward. I don't think I need to go over it. We do have a bunch of jewel sockets that I will go over. So jewel sockets are, as I said, very important. They give a lot of damage and they give you the meta skills gain energy part. What else should you look for on these jewels? I will have a list of every single modifier in the build planner in priority. This crit damage is not good. You might think it's good, but it's not because I'm currently not invested enough into crits. When I will be, it'll be good then, but right now it is not. So a good jewel looks something like this. With mana recovery, you ideally want one jewel with recover mana on kill, ideally 2%. This will give you a bunch of mana as you're mapping. It'll feel much more smoother killing those massive packs of monsters where your comets are just being spammed. I have 2 of them. You don't need to. It's nice to have 2. But yeah, besides that, you can look for triggered spells deal increased damage. This is the most important node for damage. Besides that, you can get magnitude of ailments. Those are also pretty good for a shock. And you can get, I think I have generic spell damage, generic cold damage is also pretty good. So yeah, but don't forget, you need to get your energy to 141% with your jewels. So that is the most important mod on most of these jewels. Besides that, we have our trigger spell damage here and our trigger spell damage here. It's just more damage. And I'm taking this note mostly because of the fact that we went down here for this jewel socket anyway. So why not, right? And then our weapon set. So this is our weapon swap and our weapon set tree for our curses. So in this tree, we have Lingering Whispers, Master of Hexes, Fated End, and Impending Doom, as well as, where is it? Here it is, Zone of Control. So all of these just buff up your curse like crazy. They make it so enemies can't recharge ES, they can't recharge life. They have increased, the curse has increased effect. At the more it goes down, it slows enemies down. Like your curse just become insane, right? So it's really important to set up your secondary weapon set. And if you don't know how to set it up, I did record a part of it, so I'm just gonna slap it over here. Okay, so really quick, I'm going to showcase how you're supposed to set up your weapon sets, and which things to put into it, which things you should not put into it, and everything like that. So, a quick overview on what weapon sets are. Weapon sets are basically, you have two different weapon sets. You have your main hand and you have your offhand. So, these basically function in a way that whatever you assign to your offhand will be used by your weapon in the offhand and by your skill tree that you set up for your offhand. Right, so it's not as complicated as you might think. It's actually pretty simple. So normally you manually swap weapon sets, right? But the way it's coded into the game, like for example, I have hypothermia on weapon set 2, right? So while I'm using weapon set 1, I'll only be using weapon set 1, but the moment I press Q, which is my button for hypothermia, frostbite, boom, my character will automatically switch over to the weapon swap and use hypothermia from that setup. And that is why it's very strong, because you can have one skill tree for your damage setup and the other one for your curses. So you can have enough nodes that increase the effect and the duration of your curses, just overall majorly buffing your damage. So it is very, very nice to have, and any build, every build should utilize this. So how are we utilizing it? Well, first of all, you want to have your skill tree looking like this. Why? Well, because when you swap over to weapon set 2 to use your curse, so that'll almost always, like if I say, for example, during a boss fight, I have Sigil of Power and Curse, those are my only two things. So if you get fast enough and you get used to it, you will only be swapping over to your weapon set for a grand total of like 2 seconds at best, maybe even 1 second. But there has been a time when I swapped over to my weapon set and I immediately got slammed by a boss and died because my stats dropped when I switched over to the weapon set. That is primarily because I also have a shield in my main setup and there's no shield in the second setup. And since my shield is giving me a lot of resistances, so when I swap over, I lose those resistances. So that is bad, right? So let's make it slightly less bad. And you'll do that by keeping the core of your tree, the non-weapon swap tree, be all the important stuff. What do I mean by that? Well, nodes like Energy Shield and All Res and this Energy Shield node right here, or this mana node, or this mana or Arcane Surge node, or this node, whatever, all of these nodes need to be on your main tree. Right, and that's simple. You just level up normally and you put those points in and you unallocate. Let's say you're already leveled up and you didn't allocate these points before. Well, you remove those, or if you have not leveled up that far yet and you're starting to, then just put these points as you level up into your weapon sets instead of into your normal tree. Right, so this is going to be in the case that you already put points in. So you remove those points and then you add those into your weapon set. So which points are those going to be? Well, they'll be all of your damage, right? So the first weapon set is going to be all the damage. There's going to be these nodes right there, those are damage. These nodes right here, these are damage. I did not put any travel nodes into my main weapon sets because I don't want to swap over and then suddenly not have enough intelligence to even be able to use something and have one of my gear pieces just brick. So that's bad. Put travel nodes into your main tree. That's why I have these extra nodes here as well, because I don't want these to turn gray when I swap my weapon set. So we have those points there. We will have these points right here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those, we'll have these points right here. We will also be taking these. This increased mana cost hurts the curse because hypothermia is already a very frostbite, is already a very expensive curse. So we don't want that to be more expensive by putting this on our second setup. So we put this on our first one. And then this is just extra points. And this is not a node that we need on our secondary setup. It's not going to brick anything, so we're completely fine with having this here in our weapon set 1. And now we have 3 points left in the end, and those will go somewhere that I do not remember where to put those. Oh yeah, those go here. 1, 2, 3. So 24 unconfirmed points. Apply. So you can see I no longer have the points thing here. The game thinks I'm done, right? And technically I am. I have all my weapon points selected. I am good to go on this first weapon set. There's nothing missing in this first set. But if I swap over this weapon set, this one, first of all, it doesn't have enough strength. So as you can see, you swap over to your other set and you see what you're missing on that set. So for example here, my scepter was giving me the strength that I needed to be able to equip my, if I swap over, my gloves and my boots. So because of that, I will need strength on my tree. Ideally, you don't want your attributes to be on your scepter or your shield, but if you do have them, check by doing this and then put points into your secondary tree. So the second one is going to be our curses, right? So, and we need to path over to this node right here. So we will have pathing nodes on this setup, and I will make them 15 strength because we need 15 strength. And then I can make this int or whatever. And then we just go in here, take that, take this. We go over here, we take these curse nodes here, take these curse nodes here. Right, we have 4 points left now in our curse setup. And those last 4 points go right comfortably in here. Boom. Done. So now we have weapon set 1 and weapon set 2 fully allocated, fully done. So if I swap over to weapon set 2, this is what happens. It automatically allocates all of those points that we put into our weapon set 2, and it highlights those green, and then the other ones, weapon set 1, gets highlighted, it's grayed out in red, and if I swap back over to that, it allocates those and it ungrays out all the cursed ones. So there you have it. You have your weapon set 1, weapon set 2, and both are being swapped over without anything bricking, everything being able to be used comfortably and normally, so you are good. That's that, and there you go. Okay, so that was how you set up your weapon set. That's the weapon set 2, and this is weapon set 1. So in set 1, we do have spell damage per 100 mana, we have raw mana for even more mana, right? You basically put all of your damage nodes, anything that correlates to damage, you put it in your weapon set 1. You do not put any defenses or any sort of quality of life in your weapon swap, because you do not want to swap over to your other weapon set and suddenly lose out on 5 elemental resistances or a great chunk of your ES, right? So don't do that. Be smart. And again, if you get, this is the part where I mentioned don't get attributes on your scepter. Let's say you have 30 strength on your scepter. That is how you're using your shield, or that is how you're using something, right? Or if you have most of your int on your scepter. The moment you weapon swap, you will lose attributes from that scepter, and then maybe you'll stop being able to use your body armor. Like this is 160 int requirement. What if you swap and you can't use this? If I take this off, I lose so much life and so much mana instantly. So that is really bad, and especially in a boss fight, because you're already swapping away from your shield, so you're already losing a big chunk of resistances by losing your shield, right? I'm going from this to this. So be careful, you do not want to lose out, you do want to brick your gear pieces by swapping out your weapon swaps. That is why it's pretty sus to use attributes on your scepter. Besides that, that's pretty much it. Ascendancy, first 2 nodes will be Constant Gale for Arcane Surge and Force of Will for even more Arcane Surge effect. And then after that, you will not take Strike twice because you will not have Steeper of Storms, and you won't have Archmage by then either. So instead of that, you will take Heavy Snow instead as your 3rd Ascendancy. And when you get your 4th Ascendancy, you will take Scouring Winds. Once you have the big scepter and you switch to Archmage, that is when you will switch over to the Strike Twice and Scouring Winds setup. You can also, at your 4th Ascendancy before Archmage, use Shaper of Storms. That'll make your cold damage apply shock too. You can do that. I did that. So you can either take this or you can take this. I do recommend taking Shaper of Storms as your 4th Ascendancy. And when you get Archmage, you swap over to Scouring Winds. That's it. I don't think there's anything else to explain. If there are questions, leave them in the comments. There is a whole FAQ in the build planner. Go through that too. If you can't find your answer there, then comment down below, join my Discord, ask me there. I'm always online. I am no lifing the game currently because it's winter. I have no work. And yeah, that is all. Thank you and bye-bye. Okay, so here is the Maxroll page for the entire build. Really quickly going to go over each segment here and how you're supposed to be following this. So the skill section, this is the skill gems that you will be using on the different setups. So there is an initial setup. This is when you will first swap over to the build. Then there is a leveling setup as well, what you'll be using from the beginning of the game all the way up until you make the swap. As soon as you have enough currency and you are level 52, you can make the swap. There is the late game setup. Again, this is on a 5 link. I'm not recommending 6 links to anyone because they are just way too expensive. But yeah, 5 link is more than enough for this build. You don't need to scale it any further than this. You can just stay on a 5 link, farm on a 5 link, and then transition into a different end game build after this. So that is why I do not recommend 6 linking your cast on minion deaths. Besides that, there is a pinnacle swap setup, so you can obviously kill pinnacle bosses with this build. It is very, very strong for single target. However, you can make it even better for single target. So that is by removing Mana Remnants and Grim Feast because this does nothing against bosses. And we instead put 2 different skill gems in place of those, and that's going to be Hypothermia and Frostbomb. This is going to give us a double curse setup, so conductivity and hypothermia, as well as frostbomb for cold exposure, and we get lightning exposure from our cast on minion death Comet. This gives us an insane amount of damage. You can test this out yourself because I don't have footage of me testing this anymore, but trust me, if you see the difference between 1 curse versus 2 curses, it is insane. We do drop this ritualistic curse because we don't want a increased curse delay, because for that initial late game swap setup, you will be putting 1 point. You can remove a point from anything that is the least relevant to you at that point and put a point into Whispers of Doom. This will let us have that additional curse. However, this does double activation delay. However, since our activation delay is so tiny, this barely makes a difference, trust me. So that is the pinnacle swap. You don't need to do it, but if you do it, you will notice a difference. Besides that, we have skill rotation. There is no skill rotation. It's just for clearing, you just flame wall, things die. For boss rotation, I can't put Sigil of Power here, so I put Falling Thunder. This is Sigil of Power. Just pretend. The icon does look like a little bit similar, so I mean, yeah. So Sigil of Power, Conductivity, Frostbomb, Hypothermia, and then you start flame walling. So again, as usual, your conductivity and your hypothermia will both be on your offhand. Your frostbomb can also be in your offhand setup. I do recommend putting this in your offhand because you can just do all 4 of these skills really quickly because your offhand staff will be the cast speed staff. So Sigil of Power, Conductivity, Frostbomb, Hypothermia, and then you just start spamming Flame Wall. That's it. Your curse duration and exposure duration should be high enough that the boss just dies in that initial burst. However, if you are doing +3, +4 difficulty, then it will take like a few, I don't know how many, depends on your gear. But yeah, so besides this, we have gem cutting order. So the only thing you need to really max is Comet. It is the main source of damage, and we do have like multiple different comets, so you have to level all of them. But a level 19 gem is like 1x, so you can just go buy one. Besides this, you need to level up your Archmage. So it's Comet, Archmage, and Cast on Minion Death. Cast on Minion Death doesn't give you any damage by upgrading it. You just need to get it to that minimum breakpoint of 140 energy. After you've done that, you basically don't even need to level it up anymore. And I have this at level 18, and it was completely fine. Level 18 with 20% quality with jewels, got it there easily. Archmage, you really need to level this up and quality this up, because the quality gives damage, the levels give damage, and they give you reduced mana cost. And having any reduced mana cost is good. There's strengths and weaknesses, so it's very cheap to gear up. There's no 6 link needed. Great boss, run burn playstyle, all content viable. This is all proven in all the showcases. I've tested everything and I've done everything, so I know that this is all viable. However, I have tested everything, so I know that it does not have the best clear speed. So those high density breaches, you won't really get the most out of them with this, but you will be able to one-shot anything that does show up on screen. High mana cost is a bit weird initially. If the boss doesn't die, if you are playing on +3 difficulty, the boss won't get one shot. So you will need to manage your mana a bit, and the way you do that is you just spam Flame Wall until you run out of mana, and then you just dodge a few abilities. You should have enough mana regen that you get all your mana back within 3 seconds, and then you go again. One mandatory unique, Fire Flower. Everything else is the helmet is cheap. Everything else is rare items, but they're all very cheap rare items. And visual clarity. I hope you enjoy wintertime, because you will be seeing nothing on your screen. It'll just be snow and tiny flakes of ice everywhere. There will be no visual clarity ever. So yeah, but that's fine, because we one-shot things anyways. We don't need to see what's hitting us because it's already dead. And then last but not least, it is the equipment. So the set 1, I can't really name these stats. Maybe I can, I don't know. But yeah, so this is going to be your initial swap with the 180 Spirit Scepter, a basic ES body armor, the Azir's Disdain, the Fire Flower, and just rares that are filling out your resistances. And then set 2 are just better versions of the same gear. So better body armor, a better rings, better shield, better boots, better belt, better gloves, and everything. And of course, the big 210 to 220 Spirit Scepter that will allow us to use Archmage along with the double cast on Minion Death. So yeah, that's that. You will notice a massive difference once you do swap to Archmage, so remember that. And then there is nothing in the Atlas tree. I mean, if you guys want, I can put my Atlas tree in here. Like the Atlas that I was farming with this, sure, I can put it in. I'll put it in afterwards. But I don't think you guys are watching this video for that, so yeah. And then the notes. So if you did not want me to want to hear me yap for like, I think 40 to 50 minutes that this video is, you can just read through this instead. This has all the things that I've said. This has an FAQ where you can see most questions that you probably have thought of. I've said most of them in this video, but in case you missed it or in case you skipped over to this part, then you can just read through these. If you ever have a question, just go straight to it. But yeah, so one quick note, very important note, that you have 2 very important trades. One of them are your jewels, and the other one is your rings. Those are the most important parts of the build, because jewels are a great way to get damage, and your rings are your main source of mana and mana regen. So I did set up 2 trade searches for you, so I'm going to quickly go over them to show you what it means. So the jewel one is a weighted search. I can't open it like this. Actually, I have to copy this for some reason. Okay, I need to sign in again because this button is about as useful as me. Okay, now that I'm signed in again. So this is a weighted sum search. This is very bare bones. I will update this a little bit before I post this. But to give you a small TLDR of what a weighted sum is, every single one of these stats has a weightage. And the higher the weightage, the more importance I'm giving to that specific stat. And I'm telling the trait search that I want a combination of 100 sum of all these different weights. And what that'll do is when we click on search, we will get an item that has some combination of these mods that equate to a certain number of that weighted sum. And the higher this sum is in the end, the stronger that item is going to be. For example, 100 sum item will be quite weak. So this item, for example, only has two of the stats that we want. So it's spell damage and trigger spells deal increased damage. However, these weightings that I've given it are not taking into account the rolls on the item. I mean, they are taking into account the rolls on the item. So spell damage, this is almost a max roll, and so is the triggered spells. That is why it's giving this a pretty high sum. But if I sort this by actually high sums, so like a sum of 161, for example, this has magnitude of ailment, this has mana regen, this has cold damage, and this has triggered spell damage. Four really, really good stats, all of them very decently rolled as well. So that's for 35 eggs. This is a sum of 161. Same thing here, 40 eggs, energy shield, crit, mana regen, this trigger spell damage. All of these are all stats that we want. They're all written here. They're all weighted in. So you get the point. So you can use this search to find very, very good items for your build very easily. Let's say you have a higher budget and you want to just see the good stuff. So you can just set that weighted sum up to 150. And then you will have way fewer items. So it's only 11 items with that much weightage. But you can see these are some pretty spicy items based on the weightage that I've given to different things. You can mess around with these weightages. If you want more damage and you don't want defense, you can just remove or way lower the weightage on the energy shield and then search that way. Everything else is damage. The only defensive side is the energy shield percentage and maybe the mana regen. But I really like mana regen. The more you have, the more comfortable things feel. So yeah, and mana on kill is just a very premium stat. I've mentioned that here somewhere here. So a mana on kill jewel will be completely separate from the rest of your jewels. Because if you try to get one with good mods and mana regen, you'll go broke. So just get one that just has 2% mana on kill and maybe one moderately decent mod next to it. All these mods right here are arranged in order of how much damage they give you. Trigger spells are the most, spell damage is next, elemental is next. Shock magnitude and ailment magnitude are pretty good. Not damaging ailments, do not get those, don't get baited by it. It's not damaging ailment, it is normal ailment. And then cold damage, mana regen. Crit is good because we do have pretty high base crits, but I wouldn't recommend like scaling into it too much. And so that is the weighted search. If you still didn't get a single thing that I said, then just go, okay, screw weighted searches, just hit count instead, put 4, and then just try to get a combination of 4 different mods on your item. This won't be very well rolled items. Sometimes they will be, sometimes they won't be, but you can do that instead. But then you'll get items like crit and crit chance. And as I said, crit is not the strongest stat. That is why I prefer weighted sums, but if you don't understand weighted sums, you can go for this instead. So yeah, that's that. And then we have rings. So rings are also very important. I did not put a weighted sum search for rings, and I'll show you why. Because rings, they're not going to be an insane amount of them anyway, because we don't need an insane number of stats on them. Like a jewel, we have a lot of different stats to work with. But a ring, we don't really. So all we want is mana, mana regen, and life. Right? Life is for our Exile Disdain conversion to energy shield. Mana is mana. Mana regen is mana regen. There are no damage mobs that we can get on our ring. You can try to go for rarity if you want, but that's it. As I mentioned in the video, you do need at least one attribute roll somewhere on your gear. So you can get that on your rings, ideally, because rings with resistances are going to be way more expensive. So with this search setup right here, I found 91 different rings. That is not a lot, I know, But you can just lower these numbers down. If I lower the mana regen down to 30, then you'll see this number go up by a lot. I can turn the mana regen back up, and then I can turn the stats down a little bit, and that'll also make the number go way higher. So see, so do this, mess around with this, and the ring base doesn't matter much. You can get whatever base. I would recommend a breach ring because then you can put mana catalyst up to 50%. They are very cheap and they help quite a bit. So yeah, that is everything. I'm sure if there is anything that I've missed, anything that I forgot to mention, ask me in my Discord, ask me in my comment section. I unfortunately cannot stream because I have an absolute potato of a PC. So I can't be answering questions on stream, but maybe one day, maybe one day. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope you guys enjoy dropping balls on enemies. Bye-bye.